Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. I'm your host, Nicole Gotzeleg. I'm a senior brand editor here at Hotjar. I'm thrilled to welcome to the stage today Melina Palmer. Melina is the CEO of the Brainy Business. She's also host of the Brainy Business podcast, and she's also a best-selling author. Melina is going to be sharing with you some real-life examples with insights and tips that you can use in your job right away. And you'll also have a chance to ask your questions live at the end of Melina's presentation. Once the end of the presentation has happened, we'll open up the chat to your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. As Nicole said, thank you for that great introduction. My name is Melina Palmer, and today I'm going to be sharing insights on what your customer wants and can't tell you. And really, this is about behavioral economics, which, if you're not familiar, I like to say that if traditional economics and psychology had this adorable baby, we would have behavioral economics. And the reason that the field came about is because there was a problem with traditional economics in that it assumes rational people making logical choices in absolutely everything that they do. And as we are all human, we know that that's not really the way things work. And so in this way, you had issues where there were models that don't accurately predict behavior. And so over time, what you end up having is people in psychology and neuroscience and economics either entering into one another's fields or working together on projects so they could try to find if there are these common threads within the brain in how decisions are made that could be used to better and more accurately predict decision making. And luckily there are, and that's how the field of behavioral economics was born. So you may be wondering, why does this matter to me? Why should I care about this? Well, for one thing, behavioral economics really is a field on the rise. If you haven't heard a lot about it already, I guarantee you're going to be seeing a lot more of it. Back in 2019, when Bloomberg did their top jobs of this decade, the one that we're in right now, they had behavioral scientists at the very top of the list, even above data analysts. And so there are companies all around the world, many that you're already familiar with, I'm sure, that are already incorporating behavioral scientists, behavioral economists into their team, or they work with consultants like myself to be able to incorporate human behavior into the way that they're building out their strategies, that they're communicating internally with their employees, that they're setting up pricing, all sorts of ways that they are communicating. So if you are not already including behavioral economics into the work that you're doing in your company, you really want to be doing that, because those who are most thoughtful to the way the brain actually makes decisions are the ones that are going to win all the time at the end of the day. So here's a simple example just to show a little bit of, ways that behavioral economics has been used in business. This is an example from Netflix. And way back in the day, for anyone who remembers, before we had streaming and things like that, even all the movies were, there was one movie poster that came from the production company, and that was just what you used to promote the show everywhere. And Netflix decided to try and test out, what might happen if we change out the image, if we don't use exactly how this came, but do some testing here. And they found that changing out the image could increase the likelihood that someone would click on a show and then stay within Netflix by as much as 30%. And you can see all these images are pretty similar, but the right one and the right moment could really draw attention in. And these days, again, we see this everywhere. It's constantly changing the imagery, but that's not how it was. And some simple A/B tests from Netflix and understanding behavior helped to really open up, the door for that. Another thing I'm sure you've seen and used a lot is this buy now button from Amazon. You may not know, but Amazon actually had a patent on one-click buying that they set up back in 1999 and made it so everyone else had to have an extra click in their buying process, including Barnes and Noble, everyone else. And it's a patent they defended many times and won. And with this, we'd say, one extra click, it's not that big of a deal. How many times in your company you say it's just one more form, one more question, one more page, one more click, one more this, one more that, right? But it really does make a difference when we have all this extra sort of friction in the process. And if you don't believe Amazon, you don't believe me, Steve Jobs actually paid $1 million to Amazon to be able to have one-click buying in iTunes. So $1 million to remove a single click. If you think about it in that way, how much is that simplicity worth? And if you were to evaluate different areas where you're including a lot of that extra friction, what value might you get if you think about how much it might be costing you and your customers in that process? This image here, I know maybe rings a little bit differently than it did 4 years ago. But in this case, this is just to show that it's not all about straight marketing. In this case, Johns Hopkins was interested in the infection rates that they had in their hospitals. And so in the ICU, it was standard across the industry that you would have about a 10% likelihood that someone who was in the ICU would end up with an infection. And those were very, very likely to go badly. But it was just sort of accepted that anyone in the ICU, 10% of them will have some sort of a line infection. But then at some point, someone said, really, does it have to be this way? What if we looked at this a little bit differently? And so they set up a very simple 5-step checklist that asked questions that everyone would say they did every time. The doctors absolutely knew what to do. But when you get into monotony of decision making, we tend to think, oh yeah, I've done that because I always do that. But because you always do it, you might have missed a step. So the steps on here included placing a sterile dressing over the patient and to wash your hands. Again, things that they would all say they did every single time. But what they found by putting this simple 5-step checklist in place that everyone would say shouldn't matter, line infections went from 11% to 0. And in the 15 months that followed, they only had 2 infections. And what they said is that this prevented 42 infections, 8 deaths, and they say it saved at least $2 million for the single hospital that implemented this checklist. And that's now been rolled out, across the world because the study was done quite a long time ago. But with this, if we think, now, we couldn't have had everything, right? If everything's on the checklist, then nothing gets done. But understanding behavior, understanding the steps that matter, asking good questions, that's how we can really have an impact with behavioral science. So when you think about how this works, I want to just take a step back. We're going to talk about our brains for a minute. There's a really great analogy from a psychologist out of NYU. His name is Jonathan Haidt, and he talks about how you can think about your brain like a person riding an elephant. I want to make sure everyone knows I do not condone the riding of elephants. This is just a sketch and it's a thought experiment, right? But in this case, your conscious brain is that logical rider. It knows where it wants to go. It knows what it wants to do. It has a plan. We are ready to go. And you also have to be riding on the elephant. And if the elephant wants to run in another direction, it wants to sit down, it wants to go slower than you want it to, you really are at the mercy of the elephant because you can't push or pull or logic it into doing what you want it to do. And it's the same with our brains. The conscious brain doesn't speak the same language as the subconscious brain, and they are motivated in very different ways. So when we think about communicating with customers and people on our teams, we like to think that we are writers communicating with other writers, but really we're all elephants, and when we get to work, we kind of forget that we are an elephant and think that we're trying to talk to the writer. So understanding what motivates the elephant and how it's going to make decisions, making that path really clear and easy is what the task is for you in your role at your company. So I've mentioned this, conscious processing, this cognitive processing, and we know we have conscious, subconscious, but let's talk a little bit about kind of how much is happening here. So let's have a question. This is a fun one to go ahead and put into the chat for everybody who wants to throw that in there. How many decisions do you think you make on an average day. Think about, yesterday maybe, or depending on your time zone, today, how many decisions you made? Do you think you made 25 or 500? What are we getting in here? Okay, I see some hundreds. I see 500, a 5,000, couple 5,000s. A lot. Yeah, 5,000. We got it. Okay, we got a 10,000 coming in there. Someone, Marta's upping the ante here. I see a 16,000. Oh, more than one. Good job, Chris. So what research has found is that each person makes on average 35,000 decisions every single day. And that's a lot, right? And even when we know that, how many decisions do you remember making? I think it was, I said, Chris said more than one, right? So maybe you remember a few decisions you made, but you definitely don't remember the bulk of them. And it's because they're handled by that subconscious brain. So here's a little bit about how it works. Even though in behavioral economics, you'll hear it talked about as two systems, system one, system two, conscious, subconscious. It's not that when one is on, the other is off. I like to think about it more like a gatekeeper or a receptionist. When you're trying to get a meeting with a busy executive, that subconscious receptionist wants to hold on to as much as it can. It's the filter determining what can make it to that conscious executive. Scanning the world around, saying, this is normal. I know how to do this. Normal, normal, normal. It wants to hold on to as much as it can because, when the executive gets involved, things tend to slow down a little bit, right? It can be difficult to get things done and keep them moving at the pace that receptionist wants. And so we feel it this way, even until maybe if you think about when you were learning to drive a car, it was a very slow, difficult, tedious process. That was when you were first learning how to do this. But now, the last time you drove a car, it was probably very easy. And it's not that you didn't have to make those same decisions, but your subconscious is now handling them, so you don't have to consciously think about it. Until maybe you're driving over a mountain pass in the pouring rain between a semi-truck and a guardrail, and you kind of feel everything really slow down. It's a very different process going from that subconscious decision-making to conscious decision-making. So one more piece here on our elephant and rider. If you were to think about your brain like a computer, make that comparison. It's one that people make a lot. The elephant is said to be able to make about 11 million bits of processing power per second. 11 million bits per second from that subconscious brain, a lot that it's able to handle. We compare that to the rider, that conscious brain can do about 40. Compared to 11 million, really not a great ratio, even if it was 40,000 or 400,000, right? We really need to be thinking about that subconscious elephant because that is where the bulk of our decision-making is taking place. There are many, many rules and concepts and biases and heuristics and things within behavioral economics that I could talk about with you today. Don't worry, we're not going to talk about all of these. Many of them do already have episodes of the Brainy Business podcast, which has close to 300 episodes now, and they're covered in my books and things. So if you want to go check them out later, ask questions after the fact, always happy to help. But what I have boiled down for you are a few concepts that are really going to be relating to what you should be thinking about when you go to apply behavioral economics into your work. And again, this is based on my book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, which chose 16 core concepts and then goes into an aspect of behavioral baking. I won't talk about all 16 today, but we will touch on a couple of them. So the process of behavioral baking is the way that I recommend you think about applying behavioral economics into the work that you do. So if you imagine that you wanted to start a bakery, this is your new job, you're really excited about it. But unfortunately, you've never actually baked anything before. So you have to go figure that out, get started and just go from the beginning, right? So if you have never baked anything, probably the first thing you should do is learn a little bit about the ingredients. Flour, sugar, butter, and eggs can be combined to make all sorts of different things, but you need to understand kind of what they do. So you don't end up putting in 3 cups of sugar and a tablespoon of flour and hope you're going to end up with a cake on the other side, right? So you want to know what they do so you can have a plan for how you need to use those ingredients. And then you need to know what it is that you're trying to make, right? Again, you wouldn't just throw everything into a bowl and hope it's going to become brownies on the other side, or say, well, I hope this is delicious, right? You want to know what you're going to make. And then you're going to find some sort of a recipe to follow. And so once you picked your recipe, let's say you're going to be making a cake. You will probably, if it's your very, very first time, you're going to start with going really simple, like a box cake mix, right? You're not going to just go from scratch and try to figure it out because other people have done this before. You need a recipe and you want to go as simple as possible. When you make that first cake and maybe it's a little bit dense or it's kind of soupy on the inside, you're figuring out what's wrong with it. You wouldn't say, I tried to bake once and it didn't come out right. Baking's not real. It's a very silly thing to say, but it's something we do in business all the time, right? We say, oh, we tried to use Instagram and we didn't go viral. That's not a real strategy. It would be the same with behavioral economics. You don't want to say, I tried it once and it wasn't exactly as I expected. And so that's not a real thing. What it is something that you would be testing, refining little tweaks here and there. So if your cake comes out a little bit soupy, you might go and figure out that your oven was too hot and you're going to make an adjustment. It's the same thing with applying behavioral science into your work. You want to be doing gradual tests along the way. And then eventually, as you're going through this process of following a recipe, once you get better, then you can start going where it's not having to go from a recipe anymore. You can be adding in other ingredients, testing things out, and being able to try a little bit of your own. So there is a recipe here for you to follow as we talk about this here today, which is going to start. This is the recipe that goes through my book. We're not going to cover all of these today, but with this is a way that you can start by thinking about the most important thing first, which is the problem you're solving and how you're going to be keeping people going through the process. So this is the biggest mistake that companies make when they are working on any project, not just when looking at incorporating behavioral economics. And so what I want you to do, if there's nothing else that you get from this, is to be remembering spending more time thinking about the problem that you are trying to solve, instead of just jumping into that problem solving mode, which is really how we've become wired to do things over time. And if you don't want to just go from me, Einstein was reportedly asked if he only had an hour to save the world, how would he spend his hour? And he said that he would spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and 5 minutes solving it. So what I ask for you is think about your last problem or project at work. What was your ratio on that? Did you even spend 5 minutes of your respective hour thinking about what the problem was before you jumped into solving mode? It's really easy to find the right answer to the wrong question. And if you jump in to trying to solve something, you may be making band-aids for bacterial infections and not even realize it. So you want to be investing in understanding the problem first, the customer motivation and what's driving their behavior before you jump into those solutions. I lead companies through this in one of my favorite things. It's called question storming, which we do instead of brainstorming to help identify and find that right question. Whatever it is that you do, know that spending more time thinking about the question, thinking about the problem is going to really serve you well and help give you a leg up above your competition. An example I love to share about this is a company called The Littery. And for them, they decided to tackle the problem of getting people to properly throw away and sort their garbage every single time. And I think we can all agree this is a problem people have been struggling with for a very, very long time. And if you were tasked with this, if I told you you can't do anything else until you've solved this global problem, how would you go about solving it? What would you do? You probably think, it's confusing. We don't know what's compost and what's trash and recycling anymore. People need to know. It needs to be universally expressed somewhere. We need a brochure. We need another explainer video. We need to have commercials with turtles that have straws in their noses. We need a Kardashian. We need something to get people on board with this here. And you're going to think about the logic of how they're going to feel motivated and passionate about this in the same way you are. But that hasn't worked for a really long time. And so what the Literary has done is, in understanding real human behavior and incorporating behavioral economics, they have turned litter into lottery tickets. So when you properly throw away something, you put the bottle in the recycling bin, you'll get a notification on your phone because they have these smart garbage cans, and it'll say, "Great job, Melina. That one in the recycling bin, you've been entered into the national lottery." And that's exciting, right? We like lotteries. That's something that motivates humans to make changes. They actually tested in movie theaters, and they had 4 of them over 30 days, and they had 100% compliance. They didn't have to share all these other details or explain what was going on. People knew what to do. They just needed to be properly motivated to change their behavior. So when you ask a slightly different question, like, how can we make litter valuable, or how can we dial in on the way that people are already motivated, it can really make a difference. The other thing that's important here is, when we're thinking about getting people on board with something we're excited about, we tend to focus on getting them passionate about whatever the thing is in the same way and for the same reason that we care. And the thing you really should be asking is, do you care about that? Do you care that they care for the same reason that you do? Or do you just care that the bottle goes in the recycling at the end of the day, if you only get one? And it seems silly when we ask, but it really does make a difference in the behavior that you're going to be putting into place within your organization. So the next example is of Shape Up. And you may be looking at this, and if I was to ask, what you think this thing is that we're looking at here, that'll be fun. Let's put some of these in the chat, right? What are we looking at? What do we guess this is? Okay, a wobble board, a Roomba, a vacuum cleaner, a coaster, a speaker, a couple speakers. We get a wireless charger, a mic stand. I know these are a hot plate. Yep, Raquel has no idea. Posture tracking device. Interesting. That's a new one, Marta. I haven't seen that one yet. Hey, Shirley, great to see you. A wireless phone charger, right? Okay, so what we have here is actually a scale. This is something that you would step on, a bathroom scale. And so what's missing? Hey, Maddie's got that here. So what's missing from this that we are used to seeing with a scale is the numbers, right? Where do the numbers go? How can we possibly lose weight if we don't know our weight? And what Shape-A has found is that really, when it comes to losing weight, it can be very demotivating to step on the scale. We've all had that moment, after a fun night on Saturday, Sunday morning, you go to step on the scale and you go, maybe not today, right? I don't feel great about that right now. I'm going to go run a little bit or have a couple better days. And then, on Wednesday, I'll step on the scale because I'll feel better about it. So really, the act of stepping on the scale is motivating and can drive better behavior, but the numbers can be difficult. So Shape-A uses a color system that's able to help you to see if you're on track or losing weight, and you never get to know the number. And they have seen a lot of success with people that are losing weight and keeping it off without having that piece of the number. But if you were working for the scale company, you wouldn't probably even think about removing the numbers. You feel like you need more precision. People need more information about this, and you don't take a big enough step back to understand what you're really trying to achieve, this behavior change. And that is more than just knowing your weight. And so understanding that in a different way can get you to a very different solution that really does help people. And this is all about framing the questions you're asking, framing the way that you present that information to others, and making it so it can have a bigger impact. One of my favorite studies around this, and an example to go with, is for y'all to imagine, and we're going to have another chat box moment here, is imagine that you're going to the grocery store it is spaghetti night, you need to pick up some hamburger, and you get there and there are two stacks almost identical. There's only one difference between the two. So one is labeled as 90% fat free and the one next to it as 10% fat. So in the chat, which one do you want to buy? Okay, first one's in. Thank you, Sandra. 90% fat free. Lots of 90%. We have a couple 10s in there, more than what I usually see. But yep, free. Yes. So Natasha, yes. Logically, we know that they're the same, but after doing this presentation for hundreds of people, thousands around the world, and this is based on lots of experiments that have been done, we know that logically they are the same, and yet one of them feels much better to us, right? 90% fat-free is a healthy, wonderful decision I'm making for myself and for my family, and 10% fat, you think, ugh, I haven't been to the gym in like 3 years. Where's this going to go? That feels terrible. We don't like it. So the same thing presented a little bit differently can feel incredibly different. So in your messaging, in your marketing, it might not be, if you have something that's not landing very well, it might not be that the product is wrong, that the pricing is wrong. You might just be talking about it as 10% fat. And if you were to reframe and talk about it in 90% fat-free terms, it could really make a difference. So here's an example. I was working with a financial institution client. This was what they actually wanted to have on their billboard for a brand new checking account that they were really excited to be launching. So you're going down the freeway and you see this ad that says earn 1.26% APY for up to $25,000 in balances, which is a real mouthful and definitely a brainful, and not something that makes you want to stop. Even if you understand the numbers and the math and how this, ties in, just isn't very compelling for people. And so thankfully, I got them to reframe this. We looked at it in a different way and instead went forward with, did your checking account pay you $315 last year? That is, the same as the 1.26% of 25,000 to get you to this 315, but it feels so different. It hits your brain differently. And you can say, no, it didn't. And who's talking about that, right? You get curious, you get interested, you want to learn more. This financial institution didn't change anything else about the media buy they already had in place, really just changed the messaging that they already had planned. And they saw a 60% increase in month-over-month account openings, a really big difference that can happen when you reframe the way that you share materials. So how you speak about something is really important, and to know and understand that problem you're solving. And next, you need to know, what do you want people to do? We often get a little convoluted and try to do way too many things at once. So we want to be trying to do less and know that we may be inadvertently pushing people away from what our best offers are because we don't understand that we have a herding species. So we humans are constantly looking for the herds, especially when we have decisions that we need to be making where we're a little bit uncertain. We're buying something new. And so we're looking to others to help us decide what our best decision is going to be. And so this is where things like social proof and testimonials really come into play, those star ratings and reviews, because they help us to see what others like us are doing. And if you use a big stat, to get another one that comes from financial institutions, it's a pretty common statistic to share that, something like 66% of Americans don't have enough money saved if they were to have a $500 emergency. And that can be really shocking. And people like to share that stat. However, what happens, because we heard, you think that's going to motivate someone to want to change. But really what happens is you hear that and you think, oh, well, no one else has money saved. I guess I don't have to either. I will go buy that Xbox or that new iPhone, and I'm going to do better tomorrow, right? So making sure that the stats you use, the herds that you are leaning on, are pushing people, nudging them in the right direction of the behavior you want to change, instead of, where you want them to go, instead of what you're trying to move them away from. Similarly, when you tell people that they're in the top 10% of energy use in their neighborhood, like, great job, you get a gold star, you use less energy than all your neighbors. What do? They leave the lights on. They turn the temperature down, they make it so the AC is going to crank a little bit more. They are doing a lot of these things on that subconscious level because they feel like they're doing too much. So it can backfire if you don't use those herds in the right way. And so another piece here is one of my very favorite concepts, which is one of priming. And this is the images you use, the word choice you use, something that happens just before a decision has a big impact on the choice that someone is going to make, because our brains are making very literal associations all the time. There have been really interesting studies on temperature of drinks that someone is holding. And if you are priming with different words, there was a really interesting study where they had people working together. So you've been put into a room, you're going to be working with a team of people that you haven't met before. And in one group, you don't even realize it's there, but there happened to be a backpack visible. The other group had a briefcase that was visible. And those in the backpack room were much more cooperative than those in the briefcase room. And it's because of, the associations we have with these things. Backpacks we use when we're in school, when we are working on teams a lot, and briefcases are for boardrooms and for, fighting over money and things like that. And so the images you use, the word choice you have, can have a really big impact on the decision that someone is going to make. So really everything does matter, and you want to be thoughtful about how that might tie in. And time of year and things matter, like red rose in December is different than it may feel around Valentine's Day in February. Culture matters, all these things really should be considered when you think about that behavior you're trying to drive. Our next aspect here is, once you know that something is the best choice, how do you showcase it? How do you get people to see that? So we've got another fun game here. This is a test and no Googling. The point is to not know the answers here. And we have another chat box moment, which is always my favorite. So here we go. How are there more or less than 100,000 penguins in Antarctica? What do you think? So we got a less, we've got some mores. I saw a none. Another none. All right, the nuns are coming in. But we've got our mores and lesses here. So now is the options. Okay, so we've got mores and lesses. So now is your chance. How many do you think there are? So it's easier to say more or less. Let's give a couple of numbers. If it's not 100,000, I know, right? The nuns, that was easier for you to just say 0. Okay, we've got a 250,000. Thank you, Vince. I see 30, 90, 600,000, 1,000, 300,000. We've got 1,000,000, another 300,000. Ooh, I like that very specific number there, Michael. So we see more than 2 million, 375,000. Okay. All right. So there are about 12 million penguins in Antarctica, much higher than, I think 2 million was the highest number I saw that came up there in the chat. Okay, we'll give you another chance. We'll try again here. So we're going to go here with our polar bears. Now, do you think there are more or less than 25 million polar bears in the world? I know pretty much everybody, we get less. Will, thankfully, none is not right on this one. But yeah, so we got lots of lessons, and you know what's coming next, right? So how many do we think there are? It's not 25 million. Okay, I see a 1 million. I see a 50, a 500,000, a 15 million, 24 million, 99999. Nice. Okay. Okay. And then I don't know, 6 million. Yeah. And so you'll notice that there were some of you that were close in the sad sort of numbers here. We don't know exactly, but it's around 26,500 polar bears left in the world today. So now let's take a moment and really think about what just happened. Okay. So we'll go to the penguins as the bigger example here. if you recall, I asked you 100,000 there, and we said 25 million when talking about 25 million when I asked about the polar bears. And so how might your answer have been different if I had primed you with a different number at the beginning, right? If I had asked you about 25 million penguins, would you have been closer to 12? Or maybe if it was my goal, if I wanted you to be close, I would have asked numbers that were close, because I understand how your brain is using that number as an anchor in the way that it makes decisions. But I wanted you to be far off, which is why I asked you this. And consider this. So when I asked about 100,000 penguins, the numbers you were coming up, which were much less than 12 million. What if I had asked you if there were a billion? What if I had asked if there were more or less than a billion penguins in Antarctica? How different would the guesses have been? Probably a lot, right? And it's because of the way that we have this bias, and we use this rule of anchoring and adjustment, that we work off of numbers. Our brains are all pretty lazy, and they like to use information to help make those quick decisions. And you say, hey, this lady must know something about penguin populations because she put this number out here. I also very intentionally asked you the more or less first to help us get into where I wanted you to go. And then that came up with the answers that you gave based on those numbers. So the lesson is to start using some numbers and know how it can impact behavior. Another really interesting study was done with grocery store end cap displays. They had two signs almost identical. One says Snickers bars by them for your freezer. The other, Snickers bars by 18 for your freezer. I think we can all agree 18 is a lot of Snickers bars and more than most would be buying. And if you were creating the ad for it, you may not feel great about putting out that 18 number, right? You don't want to be held accountable to it. It feels arbitrary. You don't want to have to explain why you used it. And them is unlimited. People could get 100 Snickers if they wanted to. You're going to rationalize all the reasons and probably say, probably wouldn't make that big of a difference anyway. But because I'm talking about it, it definitely does. And what this study found was that when they had the number 18, there was a 30% increase in sales instead of using the word them. And there are several things happening here. It's not that the 18 is magic, but it is an anchor that's priming that behavior. Then, when you're thinking about it, when you're placing that ad, you're thinking about this them being unlimited, right? But in the perspective of the buyer, it's, a fancy word for zero if you're not planning to get anything. And so maybe you get 2 if you see that sign. With 18, we may stop and go, whoa, 18, like, I'm way better than everybody else. I don't need 18. I'll just get 6, right? We are going to adjust off of the number that we see there that was set as the anchor. The other thing that's happening is that there's a slightly different question behind these statements. They're framed slightly differently. In the one case, the them, you're asking, do you want some Snickers? Would you like any? In the other, the 18, you have more of that implied sale. You're asking, how many do you want to buy? Slightly different question, but it takes you to a very, very different place in that buying behavior. So next concept here is one of relativity. When we have a single goldfish in a bowl, it's hard to say if they have a very good life or not, because we have a hard time valuing one-off items. We need context to see that that big bowl was actually better, because we need something in a smaller bowl to help make a decision. There's a really cool study that was done on subscriptions to The Economist many moons ago, as you can tell by looking at this. But they were giving out some options, right? So digital only was $59, print only was $125, and then this bundled option where you got both was the same $125. And so here, they ran a test to see what people would do. And you had 16 people choose digital only. No one picks the ridiculous print only option. You have 84 people pick the bundle. So as the marketer, we might say, oh, we can get rid of this option that nobody wants, get some extra white space, clean things up and make it easier on the team, whatever it is, we'll remove print only. So they did that. They ran it again. What happened? Well, this time 68 people picked digital only and only 32 chose the bundle, which remember it was 84 the previous time. So removing something that no one wanted had a huge impact on the decision that people made because it was helping to inform the value of that bundle. Again, we can't share everything, but if you're trying to make that bundle clearly the best choice, showing that the print only is the same $125, it feels like a really great value. You don't want to miss out on that opportunity. When it's not there, we just kind of think, well, print must be, 125 minus 59 or something close to that. I'll save a tree, look at that later. So again, knowing what you want people to do is really important when you're going to present that information. Similarly, this is a really difficult decision for people to make. If you're looking at a new restaurant in a place you've never been before, assuming you have the time and the funds to go to either of these, it's hard to choose between the 3-star restaurant close to you and the 5-star that's far away. But if we show this one now, people are most likely to choose the 5-star. If we show this 2-star, people are more likely to pick the 3-star restaurant. And of course, if we were going to show them all, it's now too complex of a decision. Again, it's hard to choose. You say, never mind, I'll just get something out of the vending machine, deal with that later, because we don't want to have to make the decision. So if you work at the 5-star restaurant, you can be thoughtful about what information you're presenting about where you're located versus at the 3 or the 2 or the 4-star restaurant, right? So this is in the area of behavioral science. This is talked about as a decoy. It doesn't mean that the thing that becomes the decoy is a bad product or anything like that. It's more like a wingman or wing lady for whatever your best option is, what you want the most people to get. You want to have a second option that's very similar, but clearly not as good of a value that can help people to make a choice. You would be delighted likely if they were to pick that item, but it's not really there for people to choose it. So here's an example. Imagine you have a small electronics store and you decided you're going to put an espresso machine and you don't have any others. So you place it on the shelf between a microwave and a toaster and you feel good about it. You did your research, it's a really good deal, but you have it there. And, after 6 months, a lot of people have looked at it, but no one has bought. So you may think, ooh, yikes. Maybe we were too early. People aren't really ready to buy espresso machines. So we'll put it at a deep discount, or we just need to get rid of them or forget about it. What you actually need to do, what will really work, is if you put one that's twice the size and double the price and put it on the shelf right next to it, all of a sudden makes it an easier decision, right? We can say, wow, this is such a great deal. And look, it's so compact. It'll look nice on my counter. But the similarities between them are important to help us to make a decision. Again, if someone bought the $300 one, that'd be great for you. But you can maybe stock 2 of those when you want to stack 50 of the other ones, because the point is to try to sell the other machine. So now that you know what you want people to do and how you're going to make it clearly the best offer, you want to be looking for ways that you can be nudging them along in that decision-making process. In business, we tend to try to get people to take way too big of leaps from where they are now to where we want them to go. And really, our brains are making micro decisions every single day. Remembering back to those 35,000 decisions, you need to think about those little micro moments in the way that you present information. So let's say you were doing a big campaign, you have a bunch of different things that you're doing. One of them is to send an actual postcard in the mail. And so, you're going to track it. We sent a postcard, people buy or they don't, the end, right? But we put a QR code on there or something to help make it trackable, right? But there are a lot of small steps along the way that you should be thoughtful to in the way that you are presenting that, right? You need them to notice the postcard, to read it, to flip it over, be interested enough not to throw it away, to then go to your website and read your homepage and the product page and the pricing page and put it in their cart and buy it. And we know because you're not Amazon, then they've got an extra step in the process that they need one more click along the way. And all through this, you need them to not get distracted by Instagram or TikTok or someone coming in and asking them a question or getting a text message or a meeting or something else, right? So this is why we can see streamlining that process, thinking about all these little moments and reducing them and then making them easy for people is really important when we present information and we're looking to nudge that behavior that you're encouraging along the way. One really last study here that I really thought was interesting is one of opportunistic insurance fraud in the UK, which I know maybe doesn't sound super interesting to everyone, but this is not, when we think about insurance fraud, you think it's this big calculated long-term thing, but really there is a different form, which is in the little thing like, you know that your 16-year-old son is going to be the driver on this new car, and you still put your name on it instead because you know that the premium is going to be a little bit less. Those little things, saying that your laptop is worth more than it is when you put it in for your being insured. We tend to think that, nobody's getting hurt there, but really this was something that was costing the UK £1 billion per year. It was a really, really big problem, but what do you even do, right? You could say that, you're putting out more audits and you're going to punish people for it. But what we learned about herding, that's probably going to just encourage more people to have this problem, right? So there was some research that was done, some studies, and they actually tested this using behavioral economics and looking at some of these things like how you frame it and saying that, 99% of people fill out these forms honestly, please do that as well. They tested 18 different approaches. One of them was priming with the CAPTCHA, right? So we've all had to prove we're not a robot many, many times. And if you were asked to type the word and the one that popped up for you was honesty, or if you were picking images that were associated with being honest or truthful, wouldn't necessarily think anything of it. But it made a really big difference on behavior. Of the 18 things that they tested, really all of them had a positive impact, the least of which was about 5%, which when we're talking about £1 billion issue, even 5% is a really great lift. But the priming in the CAPTCHA was one that they saw over a 70% improvement on the behavior that people had, just by something that they wouldn't even think had anything to do with their behavior. But again, it was priming them with that simple reminder of being honest right before the moment, in that nudgeable moment before they filled out the form. And it can make a really, really big difference. So when we think about, I talked about nudging, there's another aspect of this, which is one of sludge. So sometimes you actually want to make it more difficult for people to help change the behavior. So if the thing that people are doing is way too easy for them, and you're trying to interject your brand into a system that they've already gotten to where they're just doing all the time, incorporating some thoughtful sludge can actually be really valuable. So in the case of taking the stairs instead of the elevator, we all know that it's better for us to take the stairs, and yet how many of us do? Most people take the elevator most of the time. And even if there was a sign that said, oh, it's better for you to take the stairs, are you sure you want to take the elevator? Nah, it's not going to do much to change behavior, right? So what this study did is it actually made it so that it took a really long time for the elevator doors to open and shut, like 26 seconds, which in elevator time is excruciating. That's a huge amount of time to wait for the elevator. By making it inconvenient to take the elevator, you have people then switch over and naturally start taking the stairs. And once they put the doors back to normal, people didn't go back and really start taking the elevator. That had become their new habit, the new normal, because that little bit of friction or sludge was incorporated to change the behavior. So just being thoughtful about that is important when you look at, again, what it is you want people to do, what they're currently doing, and how to incorporate behavior into the work you do. So my last tip here for you, as you are going down this path of starting to incorporate behavioral economics into your work and of behavioral baking, is that it's really important to test. That's why I really like that example from the insurance fraud, right? They had a 5% lift, which if you only did one thing is great, but you didn't know about the other, 60, 65% of value you might have been able to get with another thing if you had done the test. And any of what I've talked about here doesn't really have the gravitas, talking about the Snickers bars or about the other aspects throughout this process, if you don't have a control if you don't know the value that's happening and you don't know the outcome you're trying to get to. So when you do your own experiments, it's important to keep it small. So you can't be don't try to do grandiose things. Think about Netflix and testing out the different images. Those were done with A/B tests, right? You don't have to be doing massive, huge experiments all the time. You could test everything. And as I've shown you here, everything can matter, but you need to be thoughtful about what matters to you, why it's important to your company. And you can't test everything. So you want to be thoughtful to ensure you're testing the right things. And then lastly here is that you want to be testing often, doing a lot of those little tests along the way, constantly iterating as if you were launching that bakery, right? So if you're starting to bake those cakes, you try one, it didn't work, you make a tweak and you go again. And bringing it back to that one more time, you can make all the birthday cakes, but when there's a lot on the line, say it's the wedding cake, you've got a really big project, that billion-pound problem, use a research partner. As I showed the hundreds of concepts and things going on in the brain, you want to make sure you're getting it right when it is a really, really big thing that you're working on. And bringing in someone who is an expert in the behavioral sciences and behavioral economics is worth it, when you need it. So talked about a lot of concepts here throughout the presentation, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. These numbers off to the side are episodes of the podcast. So we talked about framing and that how you say something matters more than what. Herding and social proof, people want to do things like people like them do. Priming, and that what happens just before a decision matters. Trying big numbers with anchoring and adjustment. We want to use those decoys in relativity and nudging people so that we can help them to make the best choice, but that they always still have free choice. That's important in behavioral science, keeping it all above board, ethical and things like that. And so when you are properly applying behavioral economics, I like to say it's going to allow you to be throwing darts while your competition is still throwing noodles. So these concepts here are mostly from my first book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. I have another, What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You. You can see here, there's an opportunity to get the first chapter of really both, either of those books for free using that QR code. You can also just go to the brainybusiness.com/books if you want to go there, and it'll take you in to be able to get that information to get those and plenty of opportunities to connect with me. And I really hope you do. And thanks for the time. We'll go ahead and go to questions.
Melina, thank you so much. And thank you for triggering an intense craving for a Snickers bar. I think it's been about 10 years since I've had one. And now I'm like, can I even get them in Germany? I remember as a kid being able to get the ice cream Snickers bars. So
yep. I'm pretty sure Mars has Snickers in Germany. So you think you're good.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got about 7 minutes left, and so we won't be able to get to all the questions. So we're going to go on a sort of how they came in. The first question for you, Melina, is based on behavioral economics, how are B2B buying decisions different from personal buying decisions?
Yeah, so the big thing here, so you're still working with human people that are making decisions. So the biases and things that come up all still come into play. And I have plenty of B2B clients. The thing that you need to be considering is that it's more complex. You have more people making more decisions that can be impacting behavior. So to better understand who the real decision makers are and how they can be impacting, and often the one person that could derail something isn't necessarily someone that has the signing authority, right? So there might be someone who is supposed to use a new software system or something that you're recommending that has a real status quo bias and some loss aversion, and everybody loves the idea. And then they go and present it to Sally, who says, well, I'm not going to do that. You'll have to hire someone new. Like, I'll quit before I do that. Then everything unraveled because that one person you weren't thinking about didn't want to do it. And so the deal falls apart. So that thoughtfulness, it's just more complex, more people to keep in mind.
Definitely. And there's always more than one decision maker. And sometimes decisions are made by committee, not by just one person. So that's really important, because I know a lot of our audience do work in B2B as well. So thank you. That's great. Question 2. What do you feel is the most persuasive social proof usage out there? So are we like, is it like reviews, testimonials, case studies, or do you feel it's more of a combo?
Right. So all my clients and my students and everyone knows that, I'm going to get a shirt made. I'm sure if anybody has the "It Depends" t-shirt, right? This is I say it depends a lot. And so it definitely does depend. And things that are really visual that can impact, are going to hit you differently. And that's where something like a rating, if you have a lot of stars that show up, or if you're able to show a number, when you think about a following on social media, right? So if somebody follows you and you go back to follow them, what do you look at first? And that number is something. So you think, oh, they followed me, how nice. And you go look and they have 10 followers, you go, right? If they have 10 million followers, you go, wow, I'm amazing. You don't take the time to confirm that that's not 9,000,999 bots and their mom, but we feel the gravitas of that, or even showing how many reviews you've had, and like that plethora of stuff can really be helpful in getting people to feel good about something. And so I think that's an easy place to start. If you have something where there's a real hang up, right? So that a lot of people are going to be concerned about one specific aspect, so in that B2B example, and that people will be concerned about how difficult it is to switch, because everything else they try to switch is very difficult to go through that process. Having a key testimonial from someone who is like them that says, I was so worried it was going to be difficult to switch, but it was the easiest thing I've ever done. It was so valuable. I'm so glad we did it. It, took 5 minutes and everyone was on board, and we, raised our revenues right away, right? When you can have a very specific example, when it's a key problem, that can be really impactful too. But you, again, need to know who you're talking to, what you want them to do, where they're getting stuck, all of what we talked about.
I know, if only there was just that one place of social proof that we could all just go to every time. We would just make it so easy. But you're right, it does depend. And especially, I think we've got a lot of marketers sitting on this call as well. It really does depend. And it really does depend on where our visitors are hanging out, our users are hanging out, our audience is hanging out. So yeah, thank you again for confirming that it's not a quick fix. So we have time for one more question. Oh, okay. This is an interesting one. Do you have any recommendations or thoughts for how behavioral economics fits into the nonprofit space, specifically with fundraising?
Yeah. Okay. So I have an episode on this. Ooh. And I don't know the number off the top of my head. So, 2 seconds. Okay. So it is episode 239 of the Brainy Business podcast, which you can just go to thebrainybusiness.com/239. So for any of those where if you were writing down numbers, everyone, you can go just find them easily like that. And that is specifically looking at nonprofits, because there are some things that are different. One example being when you're asking someone to make a donation and it's charitable, we feel good about it. If you then pay them for that donation or give something back, it can where reciprocity is really valuable when we're looking at selling, or you give prizes. It doesn't always hit people the same way. There's a lot there also about big asks to get a little bit less. So there are really different and specific things for nonprofits. So I would say check that out. And as for everyone to just, send me emails, Melina@thebrainybusiness.com if you have a question, or connect on LinkedIn. Happy to help.
Melina, this was incredible. I always feel so inspired. And I think I've said this to you a few times now. I always feel energized after speaking to you, and empowered to actually be a better writer, be a better marketer, and be a more informed communicator and connector with my audiences. So I thank you so much for joining us today. And to everyone else who joined us from near and far today, I'm going to look through the chat again to see where everyone's dialing in from. Our next webinar is taking place on May 25th. And it's with Ivana Teleno. She's a senior product designer and educator, and the founder of UX Goodies, with more than 200,000 followers on Instagram. Thomas has put the link in the chat, and we'll be sure to be promoting that in the next couple of weeks as well. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, evening, wherever you are in the world, and I hope to see you again next month. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Thomas.